Hello and welcome to module number 2, an introduction to Scrum, as part of the PeopleCert Scrum Master I certification training from One World Training. In this module, you can expect 3 questions in the exam. Note that we saw Scrum earlier as the most popular agile approach, so the remainder of this training and course will focus specifically on Scrum. What is Scrum? Scrum is a lightweight framework that helps people, teams, and organizations generate value through adaptive solutions for complex problems. This definition is as per the 2020 Scrum Guide. So we have the reference at the bottom from Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland, the co-inventors of Scrum. Scrum Guide, the definitive guide to Scrum, the rules of the game. This is an important document which you need to go through for exam preparation. However, we have you well covered with that in this course. The Scrum framework, by the way, is purposefully incomplete because it only defines the parts required to implement Scrum theory. Scrum is built upon by the collective intelligence of the people using it. Rather than provide people with detailed instructions, the rules of the Scrum guide their relationship and interactions. Various processes, techniques, and methods can be employed within the framework. Scrum wraps around existing practices or renders them unnecessary. Scrum makes visible the relative efficacy of current management, environment, and work techniques so that improvements can be made. Let us take a look at a brief history of Scrum. Scrum is not limited to a specific process or set of techniques, but it is a framework within which you can employ various processes and techniques. As such, Scrum, just like all frameworks, is best adopted when tailored to your own specific environment. Jeff Sutherland, one of the co-inventors of Scrum, believes that Scrum is a framework with a set of best practices learned over 50 years. Ken Schwaber, another co-inventor of Scrum, agrees as well with this and gives a good analogy of comparing Scrum with playing chess. And that is, you can read the official rule book for chess. The moves, the players, the sequences, the scoring, etc. all are specified. Learn them. Then you can play chess, as per Ken Schwaber. So a brief history of Scrum. Scrum definitely is one of the greatest inventions in the agile world and also the most popular framework. But this popularity comes with a great responsibility and when abused leads to controversies. The history of its invention itself is a topic of debate. Some believe that Jeff Sutherland, John Scumniotales, and Jeff McKenna invented Scrum in 1993, and there are others who vouch for Hirotaka Takeuchi and Ikujiro Nonaka as inventing Scrum in 1986. At this site, it says Ken Schwaber and Mike Biddle invented Scrum, but Biddle himself declares that he learned the method from Jeff Sutherland. According to him, Jeff Sutherland invented Scrum and later introduced it to Ken Schwaber. So we have a lot of dots to connect. And in this article, it is concluded that Hirotaka Takeuchi and Ikujiro Nonaka from Japan came up with the initial concepts of Scrum. And this is interesting to note, including the word Scrum itself in their white paper, The New Product Development Game. Sutherland applied these concepts from the white paper and fine-tuned it. Then together with Schwaber, they collectively presented their experiences during the OOPSLA 1995 conference. Subsequently, Schwaber and Biddle attempted to communicate Scrum through their first Scrum book, Agile Software Development with Scrum. Ever since then, the community started growing and they wanted to create a platform to bring them together, and that led to the birth of the Scrum Alliance and the Certified Scrum Master certification. But controversies began about the transparency and the motive behind the Scrum Alliance, which resulted in the birth of scrum.org. So the internet is filled with many theories about what Scrum is. It's like the story of the elephant and the blind man. And there are people who argue that Scrum is a process, but with the subtle difference that Scrum is not a defined process, but an empirical process based on experience. And someone has already argued whether extreme programming and Scrum both should be called either method or methodologies. Here is a small learning activity for you to try on your own. Write down the problem that you, your team, or the organization is trying to solve. What is the project you are working on? What is the product you're working on? What is the operational issue you're trying to solve? And what is the outcome you or the business are seeking? The Scrum Environment. Scrum requires a Scrum Master to foster an environment wherein a product owner orders the work for a complex solution into a product backlog. A Scrum team then turns a selection of work into an increment of value during a sprint. The Scrum team and its stakeholders inspect the results and adjust for the next sprint, and this is repeated again. When we get to module 4, we will address the concept of a product and its goal before we address the product backlog. However, we would like you to think about the application of Scrum to what you do in the context of problem you are attempting to solve. Also, in the next module, we will address what does a Scrum team mean and what does members of Scrum team mean. Here, what we note is the work environment will change when an organization adopts Scrum. There are keywords such as product backlog, increment of value, sprint, inspect, and adjust. And this will involve cultural shift we mentioned at the end of the first module on Agile. Though we looked at the website with a brief history of Scrum, here is a summary. First reference to a non-sequential approach was a 1986 paper entitled The New Product Development Game. The suggestion was to stop running the relay race and take up rugby. Scrum, in short for scrummage, has tightly interlocked team members trying to move the ball down a field. And the reference at the bottom from Hirotaka Takeuchi and Ikujiro Nonaka, The New Product Development Game. The authors here described a new approach to commercial product development that would increase speed and flexibility. Their inspiration came from case studies from manufacturing firms in the automotive, photocopier, and printer industries. The paper begins by stating many companies have discovered that it takes more time and more than the accepted basics of high quality, low cost, and differentiation to excel in today's competitive market. It also takes speed and flexibility. This led the authors to suggest moving away from the sequential relay race approach to a holistic rugby approach where the team tries to go the distance as a single unit. The authors also stress the importance of working as a team in complex product development in general, not specifically software products only. Note that the changes to this 2020 Scrum Guide were intended to support the idea that Scrum is for any type of product, not just software, as was noted in the paper as well. The research showed that outstanding performance is achieved when teams are small and self-organizing units of people. Teams can only achieve greatness when given room to devise their own tactics to best head towards shared objectives. Scrum is short for scrummage and comes from the sport of rugby, defined as a means of restarting play after a stoppage, which can occur for a variety of reasons. What is important as each team prepares to resume play is how closely linked the team members are. Each team is completely focused on the same objective, which is gaining possession of the ball. Time for you to make a note of any questions, or here is information by which you can contact us if you need to. Moving on. This course material is based on the 2020 Scrum Guide, which is written by Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland, the co-inventors of Scrum. It's the definitive guide to Scrum, the rules of the game, published last November 2020. It includes changes aimed at expanding the use of Scrum into areas of an organization beyond IT. The wording is more concise and less prescriptive to allow for adaptation. Jeff Sutherland, by the way, originated the first Scrum project in 1993 at Easel Corp. Sutherland, working along with Ken Schwaber, developed Scrum as a formal process in 1995. In 2001, Sutherland and Schwaber, along with several pioneers of agile thinking, converged at a ski resort in Utah to to assess commonalities in agile methods. The Agile Manifesto was created out of this group's consensus. So yes, Scrum predates the Agile Manifesto. The guide has since gone through multiple revisions, with the latest being released in November 2020. The very first version of the guide was over 100 pages long. This one is just 13 pages. Streamlining was the goal so that the guidance would be very straightforward and would help to demonstrate Scrum's applicability outside of IT. Terminology specific to IT was changed. You may download the official Scrum guide from scrumguides.org, or you may download it from scrum.org as well. You can find the changes between the 2017 and the latest 2020 Scrum guides at scrumguides.org. We now take a look at the key benefits of Scrum. This is taken from David Green's article, Power Up Your Team by Using Scrum Properly, at sitepoint.com. Scrum offers a team-based approach to project work that allows a product development process to benefit from iterative self-reflection. It helps the team to estimate their own ability to address unfamiliar tasks. It exposes metrics about team's effectiveness. It encourages dialogue about feature implementation instead of static specifications. It supports a rapid response to changing market conditions in a sustainable manner. We look at the concept of iterative self-reflection. What does it mean? In the first module, we spoke about iterative development. And however, adding to the idea, a team will need to routinely reflect on how it does its work. The second point is about estimating their own ability. It is about understanding different approaches for estimating effort rather than time. The focus is on estimating effort rather than the time. Metrics exposes metrics about team's effectiveness. We will get into this later on. Feature implementations. As expressed in the agile values, customer collaboration over contract negotiation and working software over comprehensive documentation. And the last point is about another agile value, responding to change. You may want to learn more or know more by coming to this site. Power up your team by using Scrum properly. This book is available, and it's a story of how to use Scrum for website development. It also has a brief history to Scrum, compares Scrum with Waterfall, and warning not to mix Scrum with Waterfall. And that Scrum works very well for web and mobile applications. And a quick glossary about the Scrum terminology. We take a look at Scrum Theory. It focuses on empiricism and lean thinking. Empiricism means the knowledge that comes from experience and making decisions based on what is observed rather than just theory. Lean thinking is about reducing waste and focusing on the essentials. Empiricism, another way of looking at it, is the Deming cycle of continual improvement, wherein an improvement is planned, the improvement is undertaken or performed, then it is checked whether the improvement occurred or not. If not, certain corrective actions are taken, which means that observation is done in order to take the next steps. And that is known as the plan, do, check, act cycle. A team therefore learns to do better by observing and reflecting after each sprint or after each quick, short iteration. The lean thinking added to the theory in the 2020 Scrum Guide reminds teams as part of improvement, they should look for the waste in their work. Scrum employs an iterative incremental approach to optimize predictability and to control risk. Scrum engages groups of people who collectively have all the skills and expertise to do the work and share or acquire such skills as needed. Scrum combines four formal events for inspection and adaptation within a containing event, the sprint, which is a single iteration. These events work because they implement the empirical Scrum pillars of transparency, inspection, and adaptation. And here are those three pillars of transparency, inspection, and adaptation. The three pillars of Scrum are principles that uphold every implementation of empirical or evidence-based process control. Transparency. Everyone involved in an agile project has open access to information, creating a trust-enriched environment. Which means that the emergent process and work must be visible to those performing the work as well as those receiving the work. With Scrum, important decisions are based on the perceived state of its three formal artifacts. Artifacts that have low transparency can lead to decisions that diminish value and increase risk. Transparency enables inspection. Inspection without transparency is misleading and wasteful. Inspection. Frequent and diligent inspection to detect potentially undesirable variances of problems. The Scrum artifacts and the progress towards agreed goals must be inspected frequently and diligently to detect potentially undesirable variances or problems. To help with inspection, Scrum provides cadence or a rhythm in the form of its 5 events. Inspection enables adaptation. Inspection without adaptation is considered pointless. Scrum events are designed to provoke change. Adaptation. Improvements and changes are made as soon as possible to minimize further deviation. Meaning, if any aspects of a process deviate outside acceptable limits, or if the resulting product is unacceptable, the process being applied or the materials being produced must be adjusted. The adjustment must be made as soon as possible to minimize further deviation. Adaptation becomes more difficult when the people involved are not empowered or self-managing. A Scrum team is expected to adapt the moment it learns anything new through inspection. And these are taken from the Scrum Guide, the 3 pillars that is. So this is what I have just been explaining. Now the 5 Scrum values. The Scrum team has 5 values. These are courage, focus, openness, respect, and commitment. I have read them in this sequence because it stands for C-Force or CFORC. You could take the first C either as commitment or courage. Let's take a look at commitment. The Scrum team commits to achieving its goals and to support each other. Focus. The focus is on the work of the sprint or iteration to make the best possible progress towards the goals. Openness. The Scrum team and its stakeholders are open about the work and the challenges. Respect. Scrum team members respect each other to be capable, independent people and are respected as such by the people with whom they work. Courage. The Scrum team members have the courage to do the right thing and work on tough problems. The Scrum Framework. This picture has been taken from Kenneth Rubin's popular book, Essential Scrum, a practical guide to the most popular agile process. This is a book to be read for the exam preparation. Though we have covered everything from these books, it'll be interesting for you to read through these 6 books, which are part of the exam syllabus. The Scrum Framework as described in the 2020 guide consists of the Scrum team and their associated responsibility rather than roles, and the sprint, which is a container for all other events, and 3 artifacts. So if you look at the events in the middle, we got the sprint at the top right. The sprint is the actual event, which is coming under events. And in the sprint, there are 5 events, such as sprint planning, sprint execution, daily scrum, sprint review, and retrospective. The execution itself is the sprint. Therefore, we could say there is sprint planning, daily scrum, sprint review, and retrospective as part of this bigger sprint event. The scrum team is shown as made up of the product owner, the scrum master, and the developers. Artifact or the product backlog, sprint backlog, and the usable increment. An additional one is the product backlog refinement, which is an additional event. Each element of this framework serves a specific purpose that is essential to the overall value and results realized with Scrum. Sprint execution itself is not a formal event. That's why it is shown in a different appearance or color here. There is no particular order for adopting the framework pieces, that is the team, events, and artifacts. And there should be no sequence followed when reading these framework elements, because Scrum, like all other frameworks, is an integration of all its elements. However, important to note that changing the core design or ideas of Scrum, leaving out these elements, or not following the rules of Scrum covers up problems and limits the benefits of Scrum, potentially even rendering it useless. Let us practice a few exam type of questions before completing this module. The first question is number 5. Empiricism and lean thinking form the basis of which of the following? Scrum artifacts, or Scrum theory, or Scrum knowledge, or Scrum events? The correct answer would be Scrum theory, which is based on empiricism or observation and lean thinking, reduction of waste. Scrum artifacts is one of the 3 core elements of Scrum, the others being the Scrum team and the Scrum Master. Sorry, the others being the Scrum events and the Scrum team. So we got the Scrum artifacts, the Scrum events, and the Scrum team, which form the 3 core elements of Scrum. Scrum knowledge, there is no such formal term as some Scrum knowledge. However, we know that there are Scrum events as well as artifacts and the Scrum team, the 3 core elements of Scrum. Therefore, B remains the correct answer. Question number 6. Which of the following best describes Scrum? By the way, the question numbering is continued from module 1. So once again, which of the following best describes Scrum? A, the adaptive process used to manage all the complex products and solutions. B, a framework for generating value through adaptive solutions to complex problems. C, a predictive technique used to manage complex products and solutions. Or D, the definitive method used to predictively manage complex products. They all sound very similar, but you have to go by the definition of Scrum. First and foremost, Scrum is a framework. And you see that word only in option B, a framework. Because it's not a process as in A, it is not a predictive technique as in D, or it is not a definitive method as in a D, or not a predictive technique as in C. Therefore, a framework for generating value through adaptive solutions to complex problems. We do see the factor of complexity in the other options, but B would be the correct answer. Next question. Which Scrum value is best being demonstrated by the members of the Scrum team as they share with each other any challenges being encountered? A, openness, B, focus, C, transparency, D, commitment. Sharing with each other, that should be openness, isn't it? Because the Scrum team and its stakeholders are open about the work and the challenges. Whereas focus is about focusing on the work of the iteration or the sprint to make the best possible progress towards the goal of the sprint. Transparency is one of the pillars of Scrum. Commitment is one of the 5 values of Scrum, just like openness, focus, respect, and courage. Commitment is wherein the Scrum team commits to achieving its goals and to support each other. And that brings us to the end of module number 2, an introduction to Scrum. Thank you.